Diana is going to talk about discussing post-disaster recovery practices via ludic activities in the case of the 2015 Gorkha earthquake in Nepal.
Thank you, Jasmine. Good afternoon, everyone. I do this presentation on behalf of the team who went to the return mission to Nepal and people who participate in the workshop, in the discussion. So this is the structure of the presentation. On April 25th, 2015, an earthquake with a magnitude of 7.8 struck Nepal at it was 11:56 in Nepali Standard Time, and the consequences were 9,000 people died, 22,000 were injured, 500 houses were destroyed, and 269,000 buildings and even buildings that were cultural and historical monuments recognized as UNESCO World Heritage were damaged. After the earthquake, numerous landslides occurred, and some of them interrupted several of the roads, including the Asian Highway 42. And the disruption was around 2 years. In the project Learning from Earthquake that finished this year in June, we usually collect data about the recovery of areas where the earthquake engineering field investigation team had deployed missions in the past. One of those areas was Nepal. That's why a mission was deployed last year, 7 years later. It's supposed that it should have been in 2015, but given the pandemic, it was delayed for two years. And these are the images from the return mission. Now, this return mission has 3 objectives, and in this presentation we are going to talk about meeting the second objective. To open the return mission, the on-site team organized a workshop regarding Nepal recovery and reconstruction. This workshop counts on the speakers from the NGOs working in Nepal, Kathmandu University, and members of the mission. Attendants were officials from the government and officials from NGOs. During the workshop, we took the opportunity to promote the participation in the workshop that it took place at the end of the mission. We explained the program and we present some of the models that you also see here. The initial aim of this methodology was learning about post-disaster phases. But for this mission, I adapted this methodology to discuss post-disaster recovery practice. The methodology includes questions and ludic activities that some consider serious games, others not. This methodology has been applied before for the first time in Colombia, in Austria, in Chile, and in Italy, but the variation for the post-disaster phases only in Nepal. Now, the methodology comprises 4 parts. The first is questions to participants to discuss the experience regarding earthquakes. The second activity is an activity that is a metaphor for planning the recovery of a city after an earthquake. The third is a discussion that includes a presentation, the concept of recovery and the characteristics of each post-disaster phase. The last activity is the activity that took place with the models, in which the participant needs to, based on the explanation in this previous part, the participant allocate a specific model or a specific machinery with a post-disaster phase. So, for the question, I use an interactive presentation software, and these were the 12 questions that I formulate to the participants, question with answer and discussion. I use this tool to guarantee anonymity in the answers. Here we can see the introduction to the first part with the QR code to access the interactive software, one question, and the discussion between participants. Now, the first activity, learning with puzzles, for that I use 3 puzzles that differs in size, complexity, and completeness. Usually this one, it's almost assembled. This one half assembled. This one is totally to be putting together. And I divided the participants in 3 groups for each puzzle. And at least this one, it's only 2 participants were allocated. For this one 3, and for this one 4. Should be around. That's why he's not in the picture. Now, what is the idea? The size of the puzzle represents the size of the area affected by the earthquake. The number of pieces, the number of buildings in that area, and the pieces that still need to be assembled represent the number of collapsed or damaged buildings, the age, the complexity, the impact of the earthquake, and the participants are the stakeholders that they have to make an agreement and coordinate between them the strategy to put together the pieces and solve the puzzle as soon as possible. It's a kind of competition. Now, afterwards, I explain the characteristics of each post-disaster phase. I'm not going to do it now, you are experts. And this is the second activity. In the second activity, I allocate, the participants allocate the models according to a post-disaster phase. So, emergency vehicles in the first part, or vehicles that are related to construction, usually are allocated to the early recovery, the school bus between the early recovery and recovery. There are also some models that are allocated to the development phase, on which the population learns the lesson from the earthquake and goes beyond and take the opportunity for progress. Yep. And now, this one is with the discussion, pictures with the discussion and the process. And here we see the answers to the question. I don't pretend that you read this. Here is the summary of the answers to the questions. So of course we were in Nepal. Most of the participants already have an experience with an earthquake. One of them stated that there was a kind of pre-impact recovery plan before the earthquake in 2015. Most of the participants stated that they know what to do in case of an earthquake. They are familiar with the probable secondary effects of the earthquake. They were very aware of the characteristics of the post-disaster phases, the lifelines. They recognize as urban facility mainly the schools and critical infrastructure, the hospital. They listed the long-term effects that they have seen after the 2015 earthquake, and at least some participants says that there is a post-disaster plan, a pre-impact recovery plan now, others says no. Now, what happened? I asked the participants to rate which of the puzzles represent the case of Nepal. Of course, they selected the most complex. And in the second, this is the result at the end. What they put at the end, like what they for instance located some of them in the development phase. Here I have this model. What was interesting is usually the machinery that is located in the early recovery. Most of the participants in Nepal located in the emergency response. Why? Because it's necessary to move. In the case of landslides, it's necessary to move the earth. To open the road, to look for survivals. It's not possible to wait for that. And another aspect is I saw need to adapt the methodology to the case study area, because before arriving to Nepal, I didn't know that the use of the motorcycle was so generalized. So, and the motorcycle will be very useful during the emergency response when the roads are blocked. With a motorcycle, it's more easy to move. Another aspects are typical transport in South Asia. There are the cycle rickshaw and the rickshaws. Somebody explained me that the color sometimes depends. If this is less contaminant, this is diesel, and this is with gas. Yes.
Green, I see.
Yeah.
Oh.
And well, the conclusions. Both disaster phases and emergency response actions are well known among the participants. If there is a pre-impact recovery plan for earthquakes, needs to be socialized. These terms, lifelines, urban facility, and critical facilities, are easy to be confused. Necessary to clarify that among population. The experience of discussing post-disaster recovery practices was useful to reject some hypotheses that, as academic, for instance, I have, like the priority had been allocated to monuments because of the symbol for what they represent for the population, and because they attract tourists, and they say no, reconstruction priority was allocated to houses. Another aspect was the impact of COVID-19 that I consider was high based on what I analyzed in social media. And at least this group who participated in the workshop, they say that it was not that high. But if you read reports, it says that the impact of COVID-19 in Nepal was high. They say that because they say we have already tourists. When the lockdown started, they have to stay here. So really there was no disruption on the incoming money from tourists. Well, this exercise is most easily associated with the recovery. That exercise with the puzzle, it needs more explanation. Of course, as I say, it's necessary to adapt the methodology to each case study area. There are models that didn't fit the case of Nepal. And this methodology is better to apply it with small groups in different population groups because you get different views. So how they see or how different groups are impacted by earthquakes. And usually these ludic activities, no matter the age, the puzzles and the models, the excitement in children, in teenagers, and even in senior officials. So people get really engaged in the activity. So these were the references that I considered for this conference paper and for the research in general. And thank you. This is my contact information. And at the end, if you want to play, I can leave it.
Thank you so much, Diana. This was very interesting. Any questions? Questions? Comments?
Jasmine.
Yeah.
I was wondering about the scalability of this activity, and if you thought it could identify, for example, trends in socioeconomic biases and things like that, or which schools are better at teaching these sort of preparedness plans?
Well, you know, I applied only one time there, yes? That's why I said that it's necessary to apply it in different population groups to find this kind of tendencies.
What do you think about the scalability of this activity?
That's something that because you know, I say small groups are better, but I remember I did it in Chile with children, and it's possible that some of them play with the models, but still opinions come from people who are still just looking. Yeah, but it's better to have everyone participating. So if you can identify some groups, you can have a group in different, a sample of population in different population groups that will give you a representative view of those tendencies that you mentioned.
Thank you.
So how many people did you do this with in Nepal?
We were only 8 people.
8 people.
8 people, yes. Yeah, it was more like a trial, yes, to see, because it's the first time that I use it for disaster, no just for teaching, learning, for teaching post-disaster recovery phases.
Are there plans to go back to do it with a larger cohort?
No,
Not yet.
No, not yet.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Diana.
We move to the next presenter. I think Gemma is still you. And I also, we made